Hello, welcome to A Life Without Parole. Today we are going to be talking about the opening statements for the Chad Daybell murder trial. Chad Daybell is on trial for 3 murders and a few other things I will list, but basically, this is a death penalty case. We have been waiting for this case to go to trial for about 4 years now. And I have wondered, as more and more evidence comes out, and especially after his wife, Lori Vallow's trial, which many of the charges are exactly the same, and she was convicted on all charges. What was going to be the defense for Chad Daybell? Lori's trial was not televised, so all we could do was get audio recordings the day later. I went to her trial a couple of times just because I wanted to get a feel for everything, and I've done a few videos on that, and I will be attending Chad's trial as well. And I will give you the insights that I see while I'm in the courtroom that you don't necessarily see or hear when you're otherwise listening. But let's talk about this. Lori Vallow, basically, there was no defense. She wouldn't allow her attorneys to, number one, go after Chad. She wouldn't allow them to, really, any defense that they wanted to use, she didn't allow it. So ultimately, she had no defense and she was found guilty on all charges. Chad, on the other hand, we have speculated all this time. Will Chad do it differently? Will he throw Lori under the bus? Will he allow his attorney to throw Lori under the bus? And after the opening statements today, we have the answer to that question. And the answer is a resounding yes. That seems to be what their whole defense is going to be faced on, is Lori Vallow is the bad guy. Chad Daybell was her victim too. That's what I got from it. Let me give you a little recap, and then I will show you the actual video if you want to watch the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney with their opening statements. First of all, the one thing that I was thinking about is, can you even imagine being a juror if you really truly were not aware of this case and you've only just seen a little tiny bit here or there? We know that from the jury's questionnaires, they didn't have to be completely unknowing of what it was, but they had to not be fully invested in this case and not have already made a decision about Chad's guilt. And so most of them, if not all of them, didn't know what they were in for. And to have the opening statements lay out the case, it had to be shocking for them to realize, whoa, this is going to be, well, it's going to change their lives, and it will. The first thing that the prosecuting attorney, Rob Wood, talked about, he talked about a lot of things, but the first thing that I want to talk about was that he's really lays out how the people who died, Chad's wife, Tammy, Lori's 2 kids, Tylee and JJ, they were obstacles in Lori and Chad's life and in their future together. So it appears that is the reasoning for the murders, as well as financial gain. Chad Daybell was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as was Lori, but they started their own little break-off group. They didn't necessarily publicize it. They tried to act like they were still active members, but their teachings and what they believed would get them excommunicated if they were revealed. Eventually, they were revealed and they were excommunicated, aside from the murders, which obviously, but they believed in their church. They started this secret, I'm calling it a cult because it falls under the category in all ways, and it was called the Church of the Firstborn. In their cult, they believed, and the prosecuting attorney brought it up, zombies, castings, all these crazy past lives. There was so much, and people have a right to believe what they want to believe. The problem is when they, Chad puts out that this person's a dark spirit, that person's a dark spirit, and then apparently carries it out with murder. Rob Wood said there are many text messages from Chad Daybell himself that will be used against him, as well as voice recordings and video recordings. There is so much evidence. And they went ahead and said Lori's brother Alex was also involved in this, and that will come up with the defense strategy more than even the prosecutors. But certainly, Chad's text after Lori's fourth husband was shot by her brother Alex Cox, and they found out that they weren't getting the insurance money, had something to do with, well, did that happen before or after the 2 bullets were put in his chest? Something to that effect. So to say that Chad didn't know about Charles's attempted murder, they've got text proof on that. Rob Wood also brought up the fact that Tammy Daybell was prophesied, is that how you say it, by Chad Daybell that she would die. He told many people that she was going to die young. She wouldn't see her next birthday or something to that effect. So this prophecy ended up coming true. They're going to, of course, bring out evidence that it wasn't prophecy because it wasn't a premonition. It was a plan. They also brought up Brandon Boudreaux's attempted shooting from Alex Cox trying to shoot Lori's niece's husband. This gets so confusing. There's so many people in this. But there was an attempted murder on Brandon Boudreaux, and his Jeep was used in that attempted murder, and then that's the first person that we talk. That's how they actually start their case, is about the Jeep that was trying to shoot Brandon that was found in Idaho. That's how this whole thing started to unravel. And then, of course, the prosecutors talked about JJ's grandparents and how they were calling police to say what is happening, do a welfare check on JJ. And of course, that started the ball rolling for this entire crazy, crazy case. Okay, let's talk about what happened with the defense. This is something that I've been wondering from the beginning. What will the defense try to use to say that Chad's innocent? I mean, we do know that John Pryor has said all along there will be a defense, and he has things. And this whole time I'm like, what could he possibly have? I mean, what? Well, now we know. We know what he's going to go for. First of all, he starts off talking about facts and evidence. Well, that's what we're all thinking about too. Facts and evidence. Apparently, he thinks he's got some facts and evidence that will acquit Chad Daybell. That'll be interesting to see. He also talks about Chad Daybell's crazy religious beliefs. He's not even going to try to hide that. He's just going to be like, yeah, they're crazy. That was my take on it. He talks about Chad having premonitions and that he believed his premonitions. And again, I think that he's trying to show the jurors, I don't believe it. You might not believe it, but Chad believed it. So he's going to try to use religion as a reason, I guess. Talks about good and evil, dark and light, all of that. He goes ahead and acknowledges it. He's not going to try to hide it. I think he's going to try to use religion, maybe. And he also talks about Chad Daybell being an author of books and that they were fictional books, although that's questionable. I think that Chad tried to at least pull off some of them as being nonfiction because he claims they were his near-death experiences. I'm not going to go off on a tangent. But the main thing that we've been wondering if this was going to happen, and it is, the main blame, like I suspected from the beginning, towards Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow is the reason. Chad Daybell had nothing but a parking ticket or a speeding ticket before he met Lori. So all bad things are because of Lori. I'm sure that's going to be the narrative. I mean, he brought up, I mean, who couldn't fall for Lori? I mean, she was Miss Texas, right? I don't even know if she was Miss Texas. She was in Miss Texas contest. I don't know. Comment below if you know the answer to that. Was she Miss Texas, or is she just tried out to be Miss Texas? Okay, but definitely he is going to be going after as if Lori and her brother Alex are the ones to blame In fact, he even says that he's going to have a witness come on, talk about digital evidence, how Alex was at Chad's house the night Tammy Daybell died. So I'm guessing he's going to try to blame Alex for that too. And Chad, just laying in bed, didn't notice that Alex came in the home and murdered his wife, apparently. I don't know how he's going to try to pull that one off. He does go ahead and admit the affair. John Pryor admits that they were having an affair, but he's trying to bring out that you can't blame Chad for Charles or Brandon Boudreaux, which they're saying he's not on trial, which, if you don't know, Lori is on trial in Arizona. She's going to have her trial. It's supposed to start in Arizona unless it gets postponed. But, they didn't file charges against Lori until after her trial was done for the children and Tammy in Idaho. So to say that Chad's not going to be charged, that's a little premature, because maybe Arizona's going to wait on charging him with the conspiracy part of those murder and attempted murder too. Anyway. Then he talks about how the children were buried on the farm, and we talk about, a lot of times it keeps on being said that they were buried in his back door, and then he says, but it was 4.5 acre farm, and basically it was out back. I think he's trying to say you wouldn't have seen, but I've been to the property. There's no chance you do anything on that property without being seen. So, yeah. He says that he has 4 experts, DNA expert and others, and he also revealed to us, and this is the part that's the most shocking to me of all, the most shocking, and yet it's not. And that's based on a video that I did prior about how is it possible that Chad's grown children, adult children, still believe him. And the video and some of the evidence, the video that they did has been a couple of years ago. So a lot of us have speculated that maybe after all of this has come out, Lori's trial's over, maybe they don't believe anymore. Maybe they have suspicion about their father. But now that we know those children are going to be witnesses for the defense, and they're going to talk about how their mother was sick and la-di-la-di-la-da. They definitely believe their father to this day. So there we go. Now we know. And the last thing, which was amazing, that John Pryor brought out, and that is, he is claiming that because some of the remains of Tylee were missing, that you can't say cause of death. And I'm sure he's going to try to throw that in there too. Anyway, it's going to be interesting. I will give you a follow-up. I plan to attend the trial, and I'll keep you informed what I see behind the scenes. But now go ahead and take a peek at those opening statements.
2 dead children buried in the defendant Chad Daybell's backyard in September of 2019. The next month, his wife is found dead in their marital bed. 17 days after the death of his wife, Tammy Daybell, this defendant is photographed laughing and dancing on a beach in Hawaii at his wedding to Lori Vallow, a woman who was his mistress and the mother of the children buried in the graves on his property. 3 dead bodies. This defendant believed he had a right beyond the ordinary. When he had a chance at what he considered his rightful destiny, he made sure that no person or no law would stand in his way. His desire for sex, money, and power led him to pursue those ambitions. And this pursuit led to the deaths of his wife and Lori's 2 innocent children. Chad Daybell is an author who wrote books about the apocalypse. During this trial, you will hear a story more troubling. And the story is real. Chapter 1. The defendant was a seemingly ordinary man. You'll see that he craved significance. He worked in journalism, and he worked as a sexton in a graveyard. He married his wife Tammy in 1990 after meeting at Brigham Young University, and they settled in Utah. As a full-time homemaker and mother, Tammy's love for her family was boundless. Together, Tammy and the defendant started a small publishing company, which Tammy supported in many ways. They had 5 children together. They moved to Idaho, where Tammy became a beloved school librarian. She was devoted to service, her community, and her faith. But for this defendant, that ordinary existence was not enough. Chapter 2. Lori Vallow was a homemaker from Arizona. She was married to her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and she was the mother to Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. Tylee was a normal, vibrant teenage girl. She loved her friends. You'll hear that she loved her Jeep. She loved Chipotle. She loved her little brother, JJ. JJ was a 7-year-old boy on the autism spectrum. He required extensive special care and need. He loved his sister. You'll hear about a pivotal date that set in motion the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. October 26, 2018. That was a day when Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow met at a religious conference in St. George, Utah, where they were introduced by a mutual acquaintance. At this time, both still married to other spouses. That introduction set in motion the reality you're going to hear about. We know what happened next through the defendant's own words. You'll hear. Though both married, Chad and Lori began to have an affair. You will hear excerpts from the defendant's extended text messages to Lori that reveal his mindset and his motivations. In his thirst for sex, power, and money, Chad created an alternate reality where they called themselves James and Elena, names that Chad claimed were from past lives they had lived together. The defendant's text messages reveal their story of lust and their plan for a future together. Chad Daybell wrote that upon meeting Lori Vallow, he experienced a happiness unmatched by anything else in his 50 years. He was captivated by her appearance, so much so, he said she was out of his league. You will hear evidence in his own words, how he was taken by her beauty and spoke about their sexual encounters on many occasions. More than anything else, Chad's obsession with Lori was rooted in her adoration for him. She was the mirror reflecting the grandeur he saw in himself. He called her an exalted goddess. He told her in writing that she had returned to earth to perform a special mission. And part of that mission included being with him. They soon came together and turned their dreams into a plan for the future. One free from what they called obstacles. And those obstacles were Tylee, JJ, and Tammy. Chapter 3. You'll hear that in the world that Chad and Lori planned for themselves, they identified those who stood in the way of their dream as dark. Their spouses, Lori's own children, and any who opposed them were labeled sometimes as dark spirits or even zombies. This was more than an alleged belief of right-wing labor. The evidence will show that it was a convenient narrative that dehumanized people who stood in their way and who were labeled as obstacles. This narrative gave them the pretext to remove people from this world for their own good. Chad and Lori preached that only through spiritual intervention, what they sometimes called casting, sometimes through burning, or even through death, that these dark spirits be cleansed. Enter Alex Cox, Lori's devoted brother. Chad and Lori manipulated Alex with promises of spiritual rewards. They wielded their influence over Alex, drawing him into their plotting and planning of their own future. After the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, Chad Daybell gave Alex a blessing. This blessing was reported by Lori, who was present. And in that blessing, he said to Alex, "You have earned the privilege to be a member of their exclusive religious group." And he also said to him, "You have already assisted us in ways that can never be repaid." But you will also see other text messages. Chad and Lori discussed more earthly concerns, that Alex could be the one to implicate them. Alex knew this as well. Shortly before he died, on December 12th, 2019, he told his wife, Zulema Pastenes, who you will hear from, he was afraid he was going to be Chad and Lori's fall guy. Chapter 4. Once their calculated plan was devised, it only took months to execute and remove perceived obstacles in Chad Daybell's path to a new life. Charles Vallow, Lori's husband, who was labeled as dark by the defendant, was shot and killed by Alex Cox in Arizona. Lori stood to gain $1 million, money that could fund Chad and Lori's future. Yet following Charles's death, Lori Vallow awaited a $1 million life insurance payout that never came, only to learn that the beneficiary was no longer her. Upon learning she would not receive that insurance money, Lori would text Chad, "I'll still get the $4,000 a month from SS, meaning Social Security." Chad replied to her in a text that read, "It will be interesting to see if it got changed after he had 2 bullets in his chest." Tylee Ryan, also branded Dark and a zombie, was last seen on September 8, 2019. Subsequent investigations revealed the horrifying truth. Her remains, charred and dismembered, were found in a grave on Chad Daybell's property. Without Charles's $1 million in insurance money to support them, Lori Vallow continued to illegally receive Tylee's Social Security benefits, provided after the death of Tylee's biological father, who had been Lori's 3rd husband. According to this defendant, JJ Vallow, Lori's son, was also possessed. After he was labeled as a dark entity, his fate was no less tragic than his sister's. His young life was also claimed. Later, his bound body was discovered buried in Chad's backyard, his death by suffocation. Yet while JJ was missing, Lori continued to illegally receive JJ's Social Security benefit, money provided by Charles Vallow's dad. Tammy Daybell, a vivacious, healthy mother, was another individual labeled as a dark spirit to be removed. On October 9th of 2019, she reported being shot at night near her home by a man covered in black. She thought it was a paintball gun. On October 19th, 10 days later, she died in her own home with her husband present. This was soon after an increase in the value of her life insurance to more than $400,000. This defendant rapidly cashed in that life insurance and began looking for condos in Hawaii with Lori. You'll see the rental application he submitted for a couple with no kids. Medical examiners would later determine that the only reasonable explanation for Tammy's death was not of natural causes, but rather a homicide. In fact, you will hear from multiple witnesses that Chad predicted multiple times that Tammy would die in early death. Chapter 5. 17 days after his wife's death, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow got married and celebrated on a beach in Hawaii, symbolizing what he called their eternal union. Chad and Lori were preparing their wedding well before Tammy's death. Lori was shopping for wedding rings while Tammy was still alive. Now, without the earthly obstacles of spouses and young children, and with Tammy's insurance policy and the children's Social Security funds, they could live the life that Chad and Lori wanted. Nothing was going to stand in their way. Chapter 6. Unfortunately for this defendant, reality soon shattered their bliss. 2 things led law enforcement to his and Lori's door. On October 2nd, 2019, Lori Vallow's nephew-in-law, a man named Brandon Boudreaux, was shot at in Arizona by someone from what he believed was Tylee's Jeep. Law enforcement in Arizona investigating Brandon's shooting contacted law enforcement in Fremont County, Idaho, to look for Alex Cox and for Tylee's Jeep. And you'll hear that that Jeep was later found in Rexburg, Idaho, in Madison County. Meanwhile, JJ Vallow's grandmother, concerned that she hadn't seen or heard from him in months, asked police for help. The police followed up and located Lori in Rexburg, Idaho, where the police did a welfare check at Lori's apartment. Law enforcement arrived at Lori's door on November 26, 2019. When asked about Lori, Chad first told law enforcement he didn't know her very well, despite the fact that they were married and had been in a relationship for over a year. Lies by Lori to police about JJ and Tylee's whereabouts, and then a move to Hawaii, and Lori's unwillingness to present her children to law enforcement to prove their well-being led to her arrest and extradition. As Lori refused to produce her children, law enforcement continued their search for Tylee and JJ. During that search, they located a unique text message that this defendant, Chad Daybell, had sent to his wife, Tammy, on September 9, 2019, which was the day after Tylee Bryant's last known appearance. You'll hear from the FBI agent who found that message, but this message seemed longer than his usual text to Tammy, and it had a more conversational tone. In that text, Chad claimed he'd had an interesting morning, that he'd shot a raccoon, that he'd buried it in what they called the pet cemetery, and that he'd had a fire on the property where he burned some wood debris. When law enforcement finally went to the defendant's property the following June, they didn't find a raccoon. They found Tylee's burnt remains that were buried in the pet cemetery. And they found JJ nearby, buried under a tree near a pond. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been told this would be a lengthy trial. You will hear from many witnesses. You will hear a lot of evidence. You're going to hear a lot of dates. The following is just a timeline of major events to help understand when these things took place. October 26, 2018, Chad and Lori meet in St. George, Utah. July 11, 2019, Charles Vallow, Lori's husband, was shot and killed by Alex Cox. Between August 31st and September 1st, Lori, Alex Cox, and Tylee and JJ moved to Rexburg, Idaho, just a few miles south of the defendant's home. Tylee's last known sighting was September 8, 2019. The text I just spoke of about the raccoon was sent by the defendant to his wife September 9, 2019. JJ's last known sighting you'll hear about September 22nd. The attempted homicide of Brandon Boudreaux in Arizona was October 2nd. The shooting I mentioned of Tammy, the shooting at her, the unsuccessful shooting, October 9th, 2019. Tammy's death, October 19th, 2019. 17 days later, Chad and Lori marry in Hawaii. Law enforcement did a welfare check looking for JJ November 26, 2019 in Rexburg, Idaho. November 26th and 27th, Chad and Lori leave town. June 9th, 2020, Tylee and JJ's remains are found on Chad's property. As I said, you're going to hear a lot of evidence from a lot of witnesses. And there's going to be kind of different groups of evidence you're going to hear from. You'll hear from law enforcement, some of whom will give you a broad overview of the investigation and what they did, how the search for Tylee and JJ turned to a case of murder. You'll hear how it began by people who knew Lori and Chad, the James and Elena. You'll hear about the James and Elena story and about their relationship with each other and how they pursued their dream, their plan for a life together. You'll hear in the defendant's own words, people referred to as obstacles, how they need to be gotten rid of. You're going to hear financial evidence. You'll hear from an FBI forensic accountant and a detective, a Social Security administrator, investigator, who will talk about the finances involved in this case. You'll hear more from law enforcement, from multiple law enforcement agencies, the Rexburg Police, the Fremont County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, Social Security Administration, about the investigation into these crimes. You will see forensic evidence. You'll see DNA testing to identify the body of Tylee. You'll see DNA testing that showed DNA from Tylee was found on at least 2 tools in the defendant's shed. You'll hear digital evidence dealing with geolocation data tied to certain phones that were used in this case. You'll hear from Hawaii law enforcement about searches they performed in Hawaii on the defendant and his wife. And finally, you will hear many of this defendant's own words. You will hear voice recordings of this defendant. You'll hear, recorded phone calls between him and his wife, Lori Vallow. You'll read multiple texts that he and Lori sent back. Another text he sent. Chapter 9, what's unwritten. The defendant stands before you today, charged with multiple crimes. First-degree murder for the death of Tammy Daybell. First-degree murder for the death of Tylee Ryan. First-degree murder for the death of JJ Vallow. Conspiracy to commit murder of Tammy Daybell. Conspiracy to commit murder and grand theft by deception, the death of Tylee Ryan. Conspiracy to commit murder and grand theft by deception, for the death of JJ Vallow. And insurance fraud. Two dead children buried in this defendant's backyard. The next month, his wife dead in their bed. 17 days later, this defendant marries Lori Vallow. Members of the jury, days or probably weeks from now, when the evidence in this trial is fully unfolded, we will have the opportunity to speak with you again. And at that time, we will ask you to end this horrible narrative. Your verdict will be the link that writes the final chapter of this tragic saga. A chapter that delivers justice for Tammy, justice for JJ, and justice for Tylee. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As an introduction, I'm John Pryor. I'm the defense attorney for Mr. Daybell, and I'm from Meridian, Idaho. I'm an attorney from Meridian, Idaho, over here on the west side of the state. I want to talk to you a little bit today, and at my age, video presentations are not something that would come easy to me. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about my view of the case and the facts and evidence. And what's important are facts and evidence. I think that when we went through the jury selection process, we talked about facts and we talked about evidence. And the judge gave you an instruction to talk to you a little bit about you take into consideration the facts of this case and not be distracted by other things. Don't be distracted by speculation. Don't be distracted by guesses or assumptions or hunches. It all comes down to facts and evidence. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the facts and evidence in this case. Chad Daybell, and I'm learning this, and I've had some time to learn about this because it didn't come natural to me. But Chad Daybell went on what's called a mission early on in his life. And I guess what a mission is, I'm not familiar with that, but I guess what a mission is they go away to a location and they talk to people about their religious beliefs. And Chad's faith, that was important as part of his faith. And when they return from these missions, they start the process of moving on with their lives. And when Chad got back from doing his mission in New Jersey, he met Tammy Daybell. Another fact that I discovered, and you'll hear a little bit about, is that Chad had an extended engagement, had an extended by his faith standards romance before they got married. Chad and Tammy dated for approximately 6 months. And what I understand is by their nature, 6 months is an extended dating process before you end up getting married. So after 6 months, they got married. They were married in Utah and proceeded then to have children. They have 5 children, now all 5 adult children. At some point, they moved back here to Idaho, or moved to Idaho, and they started a small publishing company. And you'll hear testimony that the publishing company was predominantly run by Tammy. Tammy managed it. Tammy was the brains behind the company. And Tammy basically took the reins and did everything that was necessary to move this publishing company. It was a small publishing company, a very small publishing company. And what they did is basically publish books. Chad would write these books, and he would write these books about his religious experiences. In his faith, he had certain beliefs, faith that he practiced. You know, when he went on his mission, when he, read his interpretation of the books that he used for his faith, he started writing books about things that were consistent with his faith. Things like premonitions. We've all heard of premonitions, about being able to predict things, about being able to see maybe when things happen. And some people believe in that, some people don't. Some people have personally experienced that, or I've been here before. But he writes about his premonitions. He writes about good and evil, and what it means to be good, and what it means to be evil. He writes about dark and light. He writes about subjects that are a little darker, like death, and maybe the coming of the end of things, and when his Savior in his mind is going to come back, and maybe there'll be some kind of a redemption of some sort. But his books covered a lot of subjects like that, and they were all based on fiction. In other words, he was writing these books about theories and things that came into his head, and he would write these stories. But he also wrote children's books, and he wrote books for teenagers, and he wrote these books about adventures and then some crazy ideas about things that kids and teenagers get involved in. In about October of 2018, Chad was going out, and he was invited by one of the witnesses that you'll hear in this case to speak about his books. And this was not uncommon. He would travel, and he would be asked to say, well, come and talk about some of the things that you believe in. You've talked about these premonitions, some life experiences. You're going to hear testimony about that. And he was invited on one particular occasion in late October. And he attended this, and while he was there trying to sell his books, and like most of us who are business people, the focus of these meetings really was for Chad to try to get his books published, because that's how he made a living. And he was there in one of his booths trying to promote his books, and he laid them out there. And this beautifully stunning woman named Lori Vallow comes up, and she starts giving him a lot of attention. And she pursued him. And she encouraged him. And you'll hear testimony that she went so far as to grab behind the booth and sort of help him in trying to sell some of his books. She obviously had an interest, and maybe she felt that he was this publisher, or maybe she had an opinion. You'll hear testimony about that. And then after the seminar, there was a length of time where there was no contact between the two of them. A month and a half, 2 months. And during that time, Chad Daybell went on his day-to-day life. He'd been married to Tammy for some 29 years, has no remarkable background of any kind. I think the testimony we'll offer will show he had a speeding ticket in 2005. But Lori Vallow was a different story. Lori Vallow was someone who, right out of high school, married her first husband. You'll hear testimony about this. That marriage was very short-lived, very short-lived. She then married husband number 2 a few years later. And again, very short-lived marriage. And there's some testimony indication that there were some problems with the marriage that caused the breakup. But the concern seems to be, the theme seems to be that Lori's brother Alex, and you're going to hear about Alex Cox. Alex Cox was Lori's protector. Alex Cox would do anything and everything to protect, aid, and assist Lori Vallow in whatever her endeavors, without unbridled question, anything. And if Alex Cox even perceived that there was a problem, Alex Cox reacted. You're going to hear testimony that in 2007, I believe it was in August of 2007, Lori Vallow had finished up going through her third marriage with Joseph Ryan. It was a tumultuous, you'll hear testimony that it was a tumultuous marriage, a terrible marriage. Lori Vallow made accusations against Joseph Ryan of abusing their child, Tylee. Yes, the same Tylee. And during one of the visits of 2007, folks, and I want to tell you, you're going to hear testimony that in 2007, Chad Daybell didn't even know Lori Vallow existed. But Alex Cox, after one of the exchanges and the visitations with Tylee, Alex Cox approached Joseph Ryan and shot him with a taser and assaulted him. Was eventually charged with aggravated assault, was eventually put in jail, and had this on his record. And there was representation, the facts would suggest that at the time Joseph Ryan feared for his life. This was a serious situation. But it set the pattern for what we're dealing with Alex Cox. Whenever there was a problem or a threat to Lori Vallow, you'll hear testimony that Alex Cox came to the rescue. But Alex Cox would run without even question and do whatever was necessary to solve Lori Vallow's problems. We're going to fast forward then to 2019. Lori Vallow is still married to Charles Vallow. And the prosecuting attorney mentioned this. Yes, Chad Daybell at that point, coming in January and February, started to have communications with Lori Vallow. And yes, folks, it turned into an inappropriate relationship. 2019 and forward. And yes, he was engaging in discussions. He was engaging in contact with her, all of the things that the prosecutor talked about in terms of a relationship. But subsequent to the seriousness of this relationship getting rolling, Alex Cox was at a visitation in 2019 with Charles Vallow. And Lori Vallow was there. Tylee Ryan was there. JJ was there. They were all present. And during that altercation and that supposed visit, much like with Joseph Ryan, Alex Cox took out a gun and shot Charles Vallow. And then after calling 911, he then finished the job and walked up to him at close range, finished him off. Now, you're going to hear testimony that in some way Chad Daybell was implicated in that, and you're going to hear further testimony that he was not. You're going to hear testimony and see documentation that suggests that the prosecuting attorney on review of this indicated that there was no likelihood of conviction of Chad Daybell. You'll hear testimony that Chad Daybell had nothing to do with the execution by Alex Cox, Charles Vallow. And the same for Brandon Boudreaux. You will hear that Chad Daybell is not being pursued for any involvement in the Brandon Boudreaux attempted murder. Those occurred, and those are separate, as well as the Charles Vallow. So what we have is we have a situation where someone who's 29 years old, Chad Daybell, 29 years of marriage with Tammy Daybell, no discernible issues in his life. And then Lori Vallow comes into the picture, Miss Texas. You'll hear testimony about this beautiful, vivacious woman, very sexual person, and very manipulative. and she knows how to get what she wants. And she drew Chad Daybell into a relationship, and an unfortunate relationship, that Chad fell into. After that, things started rolling, and issues started happening that eventually, yes, there was a murder, and there was a burial. And you've heard discussion about the backyard of Chad Daybell. Well, we have a 4.5-acre farm in Fremont County, Idaho. And you'll hear testimony that the body of JJ Vallow was discovered behind an irrigation pond and a tree out in the pasture. So technically, yes, maybe the backyard, but more accurately described as the pasture, hidden behind a tree. You're going to hear testimony that also in the middle of this pasture was a raspberry patch, former raspberry patch, that was then turned into a place for them to bury the cats, the dogs, and all of the animals on the farm. Okay? Again, out in the pasture of the field and not the backyard. You'll hear testimony about that. You're going to hear from 4 experts that I'm going to bring forward. And these 4 experts, the first one is going to be Dr. Greg Hampinkian. And Dr. Hampinkian is a bit of a notable local from Boise State University. And Dr. Hampinkian is a DNA expert, considered one of the best DNA experts. He's been involved and has significant work that he's done on both the defense and for the prosecution. He was involved and led the team with Amanda Knox in Italy that got her exonerated because of the DNA evidence. He has substantial experience. And anybody or anyone who knows anything about DNA goes to Dr. Hampinkian first, because he is the guy. And Dr. Hampinkian is going to talk a little bit about the DNA evidence that's found on the scene. Dr. Hampinkian is going to talk about the fingerprint on the plastic that JJ Vallow was discovered in, was that of Alex Cox. Dr. Hampinkian is going to talk about the hair sample that was found on the plastic of Alex Cox, and that it was Lori Vallow. Dr. Hampinkian is going to talk about several, and I mean several other hairs that were found on the plastic of JJ Vallow. But he's also going to say that there was no DNA evidence, no hair sample of Chad Daybell on Tylee Ryan or on JJ Vallow. You're then going to hear from Dr. Raven. Dr. Raven is a forensic pathologist, and she's going to talk a little bit about the circumstances surrounding Tammy Daybell. And what Dr. Raven is going to say is that there's no indication that this is either a homicide or any other crime, and that the only conclusion she can come to is you can't determine what the cause of death was. There's no way to determine it. Tammy Daybell was buried. You'll hear testimony about that. And then a short time later, the police officers showed up and they dug her body up after she'd been buried, after she was laid to rest, and then continued after the body was pulled out of the ground and continued to examine it for whatever they were looking for. And what you're going to find is, based on that, Dr. Raven's going to say you can't determine what the cause of death is. You're going to hear testimony from the Daybell children, from the children themselves, 4 of the 5 children, I think, three or four of the 5 children. They're going to talk about their mother's health struggles. They're going to talk about their mother's use of various medicinal treatments that she would use, oils that she would put on her leg, medicine and different herbs that she would take, and that her mother was suffering from, a number of maladies, and that she would refuse to go see a doctor or get it treated. And Dr. Raven's going to enlighten you a little bit about some of the circumstances regarding Tammy Daybell. You're then going to hear from Patrick Eller. He's a forensic digital data examiner. And Patrick Eller is someone who has spent his life in the military working for various agencies, and we'll talk a little bit about that within the government to do data retrieval and data research. And he's going to talk a little bit about the phone records that are involved in this case. He's going to specifically talk about the travels of Alex Cox, because you are going to hear testimony that Alex Cox went to Chad Daybell's property on the 9th of September. You're going to hear that Alex Cox approached Chad Daybell's property a half a dozen other, 5 or 6 other times. You're going to hear testimony that Alex Cox was there on the 23rd. And you're going to hear where Alex Cox was in a number of other times and places in his whereabouts and his travels for about a 2.5 month period. And Patrick is going to, offer you some information and data to support all of that. And finally, you're going to hear from a forensic anthropologist, and his name's Eric Bartlink. And Mr. Bartlink is going to talk to you a little bit about the nature and the nature of how the remains of Tylee were burned. Eric Bartlink is going to talk to you a little bit about the lack of complete skeletal remains and why, when Tylee was dug down in the ground, there was not a complete set of skeletal remains. In fact, there were a number of pieces of that were missing. You're going to hear a lot of evidence, and the judge has talked to us a little bit about not making a decision until you hear all of the evidence. And there's a specific jury instruction that talks about that. The jury instruction is, consider all the evidence. Listen to the instructions from the court on how you're to proceed. Listen to the arguments of the prosecuting attorney and the defense, and then and only then do you make your decision. And at the conclusion of all that evidence, and at the conclusion of the judge's instructions, the arguments of both of the defense attorneys, I'm going to ask you folks to return a verdict not guilty. Thank you, folks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this out. And I'll see you soon. See ya.